Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go.
Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, live edition. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your host, founder of Thrive Meetings and Events and this podcast. I'm actually here live at the Natural Products Expo in Anaheim, California this week. I'll be reporting all week on what I see new and different and innovative around sustainable food and beverage products that we can serve at our meetings and events. But all this month, March, is Women's History Month, and yesterday was International Women's Day, and I am bringing to you this month 10 women that are doing really cool, fun, innovative things in food and beverage. And I'm excited to introduce you to Amanda Thompson. She is the CEO and founder of B Corp certified Thompson and Scott, and creator of Noughty, alcohol-free organic sparkling Chardonnay and Rosé, with quality de-alcoholized, still launching imminently. Sold in more than 45 countries after only launching in 2019, just before the pandemic, both Noughty and Amanda are taking the drinks industry by storm. Everybody help me welcome Amanda Thompson. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, lovely to see you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And everybody, she's in London. I'm in California. So we've got this long time zone, but we're still connecting. Love technology. So Amanda, we had this great conversation just before we came on. I wish we'd recorded it and so everybody could hear that too.
All the secrets.
Yeah, all of our secrets. So you are, from everything I was reading about you and awards that you've won, you're leading the movement toward a greater transparency in wine labeling. And that's one of the things that we were talking about before we went on air. So tell us more about wine labeling in general, and then we're going to get into Noughty.
Well, what had shocked me, because I came originally through the alcohol space, I created my own champagne brand before I transitioned into alcohol-free, and I studied wine, so that was my background. I could not believe, Tracy, that in 2022, a full breakdown of ingredients wasn't listed on a wine bottle. That kind of blew my mind when you think about legal medicines, every microcosm of what we're eating in stores. I was really shocked that was possible. And certainly on my side of the pond, I'm London-based, so I come from, I suppose, what we call the old wine world, France, Italy, the history that brings. The wine industry itself, truthfully, was not desperate to innovate in that way. They really weren't, and I'm putting that in a very polite way. It's interesting that over here, the EU, you may or may not know, in the US, Britain's gone independent. We've come out of the EU, but the EU has been working hard on legislation that I think will make accountability much clearer in labeling. But also the problem we've got is so much wine is traveling around the world, and each country has its own fixation with what I've been surprised to see, very different elements of what we should be saying on the back label. And just to be clear to everybody, I'm talking about the back labels. So a lot of you might just be focused with brands on the front label. I'm talking about the back label that a lot of us perhaps don't bother to read. But of course, if you've got any allergic issues, for example, sometimes light, sometimes more serious, you will have no idea whether there's something that you can or can't be drinking. And I think that's pretty damn crazy.
That is crazy and very scary. And Camper English, who I interviewed last year, he's all about creating safety around allergies and alcohol. But it really is mind-blowing. And people are like, don't want to tell the secret. I don't want to know your recipe. I just want to know if this is in it,
Absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head that perhaps we've been able to hide behind mystique. And I am a fine wine lover. I do recognize that it's an art. I'm obsessed with brilliant winemakers. That said, it really needs to have an ingredients list. We need to know what's in our bottle. I mean, how can I offer you a drink and you say to me what's in here and I say, actually, I'm not going to tell you? I mean, and I think most consumers, we just kind of go, oh, it's wine.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we do, right? And then we go, actually, if we have got even 2 minutes to sort of lift back the curtain, it isn't just wine. It's going to have all manner of other things in there too, even if it's organic, even if it's natural. You know, whatever natural means, it has different definitions in different contexts. And so I think without that clarity, I just think that it's not appropriate in the modern world. And most of the younger generation, the modern consumer, 100% agrees. I think it's those who historically have closed their mind. And you could argue, I mean, JancysRobinson.com, which is Jancis Robinson is one of our most famous wine critics. She did a really interesting piece for the Financial Times in London recently. It was published. And she was saying, look, you know, maybe there are some makers who just don't want to tell you. And I think we have to really recognize that if we're buying a very, very, very cheap bottle, then it will be a ton of sugar. It will be a ton of chemicals. The only way to make really cheap wine palatable, exactly like processed food, is to chuck in the sugar, the really cheap sugar, not organic sugar, just nasty sugar you might not even want in your tea, and then the chemicals, exactly like processed food. So you also have to be aware that in wine, really, you generally are getting what you pay for when it comes to the supermarket stuff.
That's really interesting. And I'm gonna before we get into my next question that I have, I just want to let everybody know you worked for the BBC and you changed ships, jumped ship and went into this, and so you learned this very quickly, and so tell everybody a little bit about why you jumped ship of being in the media world to come into this wine world.
It's strange. I used to be the one asking the questions. It's unusual to be the ones answering them now, running a business. Champagne was my buzz, Tracy. I was in the art space. So I was an art obsessive, film, fashion, music, theatre. And back in the day before social media, as I tell my daughter, we used to work hard and play hard. It's not at all recommended now in the corporate world. But, champagne was my buzz. And often we would be staying up all night reporting, makeup and hair in the morning, back on air. Again, these were the old days. And I started to really become obsessed with what was in my bottle. And I started to recognize that not only were not all brands of champagne created equal, when it came to the aesthetic and the taste, but also I was really interested in the sugar angle and what sugar was doing to wine, and the fact that I didn't really know how much sugar was being added apart from what I was tasting. And at this point, I wasn't trained in wine tasting. And that really started the seed of this idea, could I create my own brand based on being as pure as possible, cutting as much sugar where possible, but still retaining the balance? Could I also work with organic grapes? Could I really stay well away from chemicals that I wouldn't want written on a label? And those were really all of the drivers that led me to move my family to Paris, had a few credit cards. I mean, I left my career behind. My husband, luckily, was in a career where he could move to France, and I put my children in school there. And I studied for the first ever wine diploma, actually, at the Cordon Bleu school in Paris.
That's interesting. And then how many years later did you create Noughty?
Well, I came back in 2013, and I wasn't going to sell snow to the Eskimos and try and launch a champagne in Paris. So I thought, well, London's a bit more entrepreneurial in my mind. So hopefully, if I can make it in London. I had no idea how closed the wine world was at that point to new visions. That's a whole other podcast, probably. But I transitioned to alcohol-free, as you mentioned in the intro, just pre-pandemic. So that would be 2019. We just started working with Noughty in London. We were just placing it in some lovely hotels, bars, and restaurants. Then the pandemic hit, and like every business, startups through to corporates, you have that panic moment. What the hell am I going to do? And then I recognized, like a classic entrepreneur, we had to double down on the opportunity. So I was online on my Mac, a really unhealthy amount, but I started to see that there was this incredible global community of alcohol-free lovers that wanted to hear my story and wanted to swap their histories and what they were doing with me. And so that really was how the buzz, I suppose, the touch paper was lit. There was a wonderful guy called Marcus Salazar who had a platform called For All Drinks, and he ran an alcohol-free festival where we started talking about all the brilliant alcohol-free brands that were out there. And I got to say, you Americans were just incredible for me. I mean, America embraced my brand really early on. And then the media went nuts. We had this incredible buzz with the New York Times, with the LA Times, Washington Post, NBC, you name it. Pure PR. None of this was paid for. And the buzz really just was, the train had left the station. It just went crazy. And so I recognized that if I could just really, work that crazy amount, spread the word, there was a real concrete opportunity to launch the brand globally, despite the sad situation so many people were in around the world with the pandemic.
So I want to go back to one thing. Over the weekend, I was with a friend who's vegan, and I'm like, hey, do you pay attention to your wine? She came over to my friend's house to drink wine, and I'm like, Delphine, do you pay attention to the labeling and what's in your wine and if it's vegan or not? She's like, it's grapes. Shouldn't it just be vegan? And I'm like, no. I'm like, here, check barnivore.com, right? So tell people about the vegan aspect of wine.
The vegan aspect is really interesting because we were the first mainstream brand, certainly in the UK, to make a fuss about the fact that we were vegan. And we were like, we're vegan certified, we're vegan friendly, we aren't using any animal derived products in our fining, and that's essentially the filtration process. So, before a wine's filtered, you'll know, Tracy, but just for everybody who might not,
right.
You're getting all the bits out, essentially. So any of the matter that has come from the grape, you're fining it to make it a nice clear liquid. If anyone drinks natural wine, you'll know sometimes it's a bit cloudy and there's a few bits in it. But for most wine, you're taking those bits of matter out. And historically, I mean, in the old days with red wine, bull's blood was used, fish guts.
Wow.
So things that you 100% would not want on your wine label, vegan or not. More recently, egg albumin and dairy-derived products, which is the relevant part for the vegan element. And so a lot of the vegan community obviously are maybe quite relaxed and say that, oh, well, I eat a bit of Parmesan, I eat a bit of gelatin. That's fine. For those who aren't vegan, that's fine too. Just saying you're a vegan certified wine is just clarifying for those who really do want to know and do care and are following a stricter vegan diet, that we're not using any animal derived products in the filtration of our wine. And that really started the ball rolling. So we became known for being a very vegan friendly wine in that aspect. And of course, a lot of carnivores would go, well, why do I care? And we're like, it doesn't matter that you don't care. It's about those people in the vegan community that actually do care. And that's what's been so interesting to me about a lot of those markers. I think because a lot of people in the wine world historically are a bit older, and I say that as a woman who's proud of her age. I suppose it goes back to your original question about just being as open and honest as you can be about what is in the bottle. I know I was going down the road of saying, age is just a number. I've always thought it's a state of mind. I'm 50, proud of it. But it does tend historically in the wine world, certainly at the higher echelons, to be a lot of older men. It's just the way it is. It's just a fact. It is changing, but not fast enough. And so you do get a lot of people who go, well, why do I care? And of course, they may not care, and that's absolutely fine. But the huge gap in the market was for those that did. And that was how we hit that vegan community right across the world, with everyone going, oh my God, Noughty's a vegan wine. And it enabled us to start the conversation about which animal-derived products are used in wine. So it's just all about that openness from my perspective.
Well, and that goes to the question that I posed to you before we came on, is that I recently met a wine influencer who's like, I don't understand who the market is for. This wine is for, because for somebody who's in the sober community, do they even want to drink something that tastes like wine or beer or whatever because they're sober? Or is it just for dry January, right? So it's
It's so funny. I mean, I do spend my life occasionally, more than occasionally, having those conversations. And for me, it's a classic closed-minded attitude for those who aren't open to innovation and are probably a bit scared themselves that some element of their history is about to get blown apart, which of course is not the plan at all. For me, the great analogy is what's happened in the craft beer world, an alcohol-free beer. And Bill Schufelt, an athletic beer over on your side of the pond, is obviously the trailblazer there. And you've got so many great alcohol-free craft beers. I mean, we could spend a long time listing them all out and play a game. There are so many now coming on board and following in athletics' footsteps. And I think what had happened with wine was, it's not easy to make really good alcohol-free wine, but then it's not easy actually to make great alcohol-free beer. It's just that the means of production in the drinks business are generally, again, controlled by older men. And I think that they probably just had that sort of arrogant, closed-minded attitude, like, alcohol-free has been catered for. I mean, anyone who's not drinking wine, they can have a Coca-Cola or a water or something else equally sugary and non-celebratory and slightly depressing. And so, it may not be for him, and it probably isn't. And if he's happy to drink a lot of wine, he should be my guest. But there is also a bit of a dark butt here, which is whichever way we look at it. And I say this as somebody who comes from the fine wine world, loves fine wine, recognizes brilliant winemakers as artists. So that's, my caveat, putting it out there. We cannot pretend it's a health food. We cannot pretend that we need it in our lives. There is no scientist in 2022 who will tell us. There's been a few sort of fake stories about how we need it for our heart and whatnot, but we cannot really create that sort of scientific proof. And so sadly, in the pandemic, alcoholism was on the rise, and you had this sort of slightly sad dichotomy where a lot of people were turning to alcohol as a crutch to find a bit more balance in their lives. But so going back to the cynical guy's question, who's it for? It's really been proved across the last 2 years to me. It is for pretty much everybody apart from those who are closed-minded, because we have a consumer base that stretches very far and wide across the world. So you touched on the sober community. Now we have some incredible sober fans in America and the UK. Now, for those who are triggered by alcohol, they would have their own reasons then for not drinking Noughty, and we would never be trying to seduce them into drinking it, let's be clear. But a lot of the sober community are loving Noughty. Those fine wine lovers who recognize for health reasons they perhaps shouldn't be drinking as much as they're drinking, which is pretty much all of us who are smart these days. Pregnant women, people driving, those who drink for religious reasons, young people who are driving the movement, they're drinking a lot less. Those who are living and recognizing that one false move drunk online could cost them their career. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Sports people, we work with many sports people who, just don't drink a drop. I mean, for me, the transition from the champagne world to the alcohol-free world has blown my mind in terms of recognizing how broad the opportunity is and how it was almost a gap waiting for me to fill it. And now I'm delighted that we have what I suppose it's fair to call competition, which is some lovely alcohol-free winemakers coming in. There's some great ones in the US now, because it was really me single-handedly talking about premiumizing this category. And luckily, I'm a founder board member of Amber, the acronym? The alcohol-free, no, it's Amber. Alcohol, I should know this, I'm going to get told off for it. Anyway, Adult Non-Alcoholic Beverage Association. Marcus, don't tell me off. Adult Non-Alcoholic Beverage Association, AMBA, ANBA. I was lucky enough to be invited as the only Brit to be on the board. And we're really trying to shape that education piece as all of the alcohol-free founders come together, like they have historically in the brewing world, to really make sure that all of the misnomers about brilliant premium non-alcoholic beverages are blown out of the water, and we can really allow the cynics to have a taste and blow their minds as well.
Well, and we need to do that because in general, I mean, as a meeting planner I went to an event a couple of weeks ago, and one of the hotels with, has their daily happy hour, right? And they give you a pass to go down to, hey, here's your free drink for the happy hour. And I went down and I'm like, well, what are my options? And they're like, well, you can have beer or wine. And I'm like, well, what about a mocktail? They're like, you can have a Shirley Temple. I'm like, what? I'm like, my option for a mocktail is a Shirley Temple. And I couldn't even get a bottle of water. It was soda.
Wow.
It was beer and wine. And that was it. And I'm like, okay, we need to open up this market. And because not every one of your guests drinks alcohol, right? And they don't want to drink that soda. So let's, whether it's cynical or whether it's lack of education of what there's out there, how do we get them to bring that in? And is it their distributors that don't even know anything about it, right?
Yeah,
and actually,
I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've raised a brilliant point.
Mm-hmm. And then one of them said that, oh, well, we don't have enough demand for it. Well, okay, so meeting planners, we need to start demanding it, right?
Brilliant. I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think in the hospitality world's defense, we all know much of it has been ravaged by the pandemic. And I think what did happen was the world moved on so fast with premium non-alcoholic beverages in America and the UK and even many, many other countries, the fact that we're now selling in over 45. So I think there's a lot of catching up to do. So I think there's that catch up to do. There's, founders like mine and the Amber Group, we've got to educate brilliant change makers like you in the meeting space and your world, the more you demand. And I think it's about people just sharing the conversation. And it's also importantly, because I did a whole piece with the Times in London about procurement the other day for International Women's Day. It's about the important people who can make the decisions asking procurement or really politely forcing procurement to have those more innovative, forward-facing, brilliant premium alcohol-free options. Because ultimately, probably everybody's overworked and everybody's got there. We just buy the same old on rotation. So it takes someone, doesn't it, to really create a quite dramatic shift to say, oh, God, yeah, actually, well, they won't get the contract for the meeting unless they've got. I mean, I always think the way to create change is the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I was talking with the Times about quotas and, I laugh because there was somebody arguing against me, a captain of industry, and he still, no, I don't think quotas are the way. I said, hang on a second. We've had unofficial quotas forever. You're not telling me that you're not going to have incredible innovative brands if you open up your procurement process to just 1% of female-founded businesses. You're missing out on your bottom line because the consumer will start to vote with their feet and they will start to demand brands that are front-facing, B Corp certified, put sustainability at the heart, have a female founder at the helm. You're going to really miss out on that. So I think if we bring the bottom line into this conversation, that's when you can really create change. I think polite conversation just isn't creating enough movement.
Well, and that's a really good point because somebody yesterday at the Natural Products Expo said, you can't tell somebody to just change their job, right? You can't force them to change it. But if you tell them to think about the policies, we need to make changes in our policies. We need to change changes in our practices, make them think about it that way. So you're not kind of forcing them to make the change. You're making them think differently about how we do things. It's still hard, but we can still, don't say, hey, you've got to do this now. Make them think about, well, if we do this, we're adding this extra bottom line to our opportunities, right? And in the food allergy world has a humongous opportunity to add more to the bottom line. The non-alcoholic, especially when like 30% of people don't drink alcohol.
It's insane that wine just was not catered for, isn't it? It's insane. Right. And I guess like beer, you've long had the opportunity to have that alcohol-free beer alongside your corporate, often men, women, whatever. But, historically, often the gender breakdown is that more men will drink beer. That's a fact. I know it's not fashionable to talk about gender in such clean lives, but really sparkling wine is drunk more by women historically and beer men. And I think there's also that factor when you've got the male gatekeepers who are like, oh, we've catered for that. We've got alcohol-free beer. That's done. And of course, therein lies another sort of barrier to entry. And probably because, you Americans are making a massive cultural sort of stereotype, but you're much better about being sort of, politely asking for things. Us Brits are terrible. I don't want to bother anybody. We sort of talk around everything. Oh gosh, well, I'll just have a Shirley Temple or a water. It needs people to be much more upfront and say, well, I'm here. I've driven. What about if I've driven? You want me to drink and drive? Sometimes I think we've got to get harder messages out there to get that change, right? Because I think that, a few of us politely asking for it isn't going to do, is not going to work fast enough. But I think you're right. When people recognize the policies behind things, that's when you get the change. And it's really the leaders. So what I try and do, the way I can leverage a deal really quickly is if I can have a conversation with a leader who can make the decisions. It's when you mess around in the middle that I could spend years trying to get a deal done. And I'll give you an example. EY, which of course is a huge... You know the brand EY. I won a prize with them. I was one of the winning women, along with a lot of American women. We had a lovely opportunity, female founders getting together. I was desperate to work with them on a procurement deal. Now, of course, it was as hard as any big corporate procurement deal. But, the hustle also comes to play as an entrepreneur. So you think, right, okay, I can't get a procurement deal right now with EY. What about if some of them on the entrepreneur program start doing a few corporate gifts? What about if when Joanna, who's running the founders program, has a small event in London? What about if we have a few bottles there? So, it's about getting the visibility, getting your brand associated with the corporate and often in a smaller way, and then seeing if you can then get to the decision maker. And I think that's where people like you are going to be so pertinent to this conversation, because you can bring about change because you've got the power. Because those who don't have the power, we can politely ask all we like, but it just doesn't get anything done, does it? So I think it's about the change makers changing the policies.
Well, and just talking about them, think about all their employees, right? It's not just corporate. It's not just big conventions like this. It's your corporate events that you have internally, your national sales meetings or your employee engagement events, right? Not everybody's going to drink. And, how are we incorporating that into? It's a benefit of employment. It's under allowing all of your employees to bring their whole selves to work. And that includes those who don't drink. Right. And
you've really got it there. That encapsulates it beautifully. And I think when you put it like that, it almost seems offensive not to do that. When we kind of think about that world where I had no idea it existed until I was immersed in the space. I wouldn't have thought about that. I was on the other side. And once you're on our side, you kind of go, oh my God, we made it awkward for the Muslim employee who didn't drink, for the ex-alcoholic, for the person who was driving, for the pregnant woman who didn't want to announce it. Whatever your reason, for the person running a marathon in the morning who couldn't, didn't want to share his fitness goals. Whatever. There's such a myriad of reasons. And I think the beauty of Noughty is with our sparkling, and the same when our stills come out, is the idea for me with the branding was really important. It needed to sit alongside its premium alcoholic counterpart very comfortably, because some people want to publicize the fact that they're not drinking. Many, many others don't. And if you look at the way the younger generation are coming into the working world, and you look at the way my generation historically in the corporate world probably drank a bit too much, a lot of them are coming in not drinking, but they still want a seat at the table. And like your event, if somebody comes in who's not drinking, you're almost creating a really obvious signpost, like, I'm Tracy, I'm not drinking. Now, it shouldn't be this way, but we all know, America, UK, that's going to be the first conversation. And it's such a boring, irrelevant, unfair conversation. You know, we always say in the alcohol-free world, when we've got delicious drinks, the question should be, what are you drinking? But the interesting thing about events is, I find, what Noughty does, it emulates that, where you could have a glass of champagne, I could have a glass of Noughty, it looks like we're drinking the same thing. And I think men have long had that, and women who drink beer have long had that sort of crutch where it doesn't have to be that big beacon on their head. And I think that is another really important part of the corporate world.
Mm-hmm. It really, really is. And Haley Moss, who I interviewed a couple of months ago, she's a lawyer in Florida who has a neuro disability. And she's like, why do you have to ask me why I don't drink? Right. And so, and it is the thing when you go to lawyer events or even meeting planning events, right? The thing is to drink, but why is it important that you ask why I don't drink? Or, you know, oh, really? You can't have just a little bit, right? I'm like,
it's such actually a personal question, isn't it? I mean, it really is. It's super personal. And also, surely we've got better things to talk about. I mean, therein lies the irony, right? I mean, you know, that whole idea that you're boring if you don't drink. Well, wow. I mean, I think, you know, we've all got to work on our personalities there, haven't we? And I understand that a lot of people use it as a crutch, but I think if we are using it as a crutch, it's probably quite useful to take a look at ourselves and work out if that is something we need to think more deeply about. I mean, what a lot of people do with Noughty is, I've learned, they'll have perhaps one glass of champagne and then switch to Noughty, you know, which I think is another lovely way to be managing events, if you do still drink, obviously. Right. Yeah, but I think around the world as well, they've got zero tolerance on alcohol policy at so many places now. I mean, I know Australia has really tightened up, for example. And of course, in conferencing, I know you're very tight in America. Yeah. In conferencing, often people are not staying the night, and they'll often be traveling and driving, you know. And of course, from a corporate management point of view, when it comes to events, you really want to be thinking about your employees' well-being if they are hitting up that wine and then getting in the car.
Exactly. Well, and I've told this story before, but in my old corporate job, the next morning, the event planner was telling me how this woman had fallen into the fountain because she had too much to drink, and the competitor pulled her out. And I'm like, please don't be my employee. Please don't be one of my colleagues. And it was. And she ended up losing her job. And because of the exposure that she, you know, provided to everybody knew who she was and who she worked for. And I mean, that's just a shame. But it's also a shame on the property or the venue whose bartenders didn't stop serving her, right? At the same time.
Absolutely.
So that comes with that education too. Okay, so it's Women's History Month. And I want to know who has influenced you in this? Mom, dad, a colleague in the industry? What sage advice have they given you to push forward and do this?
Well, my father's attitude was always, do not chase money in your life. When I was really young, he was an immigrant, and your classic, well, I don't know whether you say $5, $10, £5 in his pocket. You know, I don't know what you say. Is it $10? You know, is that the story in America?
I don't really remember.
the sum changes in immigrant stories. But his attitude was always, do not chase the money. It comes when you follow your passion. And I remember when I was very young, he taught me, if ever there was an awkward moment, pay that bill. Even if you can't afford it, be the first one to offer somebody a drink. So that sort of generosity of heart and spirit, irrespective of your means. And he always sort of had taken that through into his business life. And his attitude was, success comes when you're not just chasing the money. And I think as I got older, I've started to reflect more on what that gave me, both as a person, in my attitude to money growing up, and in recognizing generosity in other people, and also in business when I am hugely competitive, I am hugely ambitious. I always want to get the deal, but I think it's really interesting that has retained at my core, I guess, because I think if you're chasing money, in a founder-led business, I think it comes out very quickly. I love the term authenticity, which I think you Americans use in a better way than us, but I like that term. And I think that you get found out really quite quickly in the modern world if you are fake, both as a person and in business. So I think that lesson has been very useful for me, big picture.
I love that lesson because it should be about your purpose and not about that revenue. And I've been really focusing on the word purpose a lot in the last couple of weeks because it's food and beverage should have purpose, right? And whether it's ethnically, whether it's culturally, whether it's, just planning a food and beverage event, it should have purpose. And your wine has purpose. It's filling a need of someone, but filling the need helps you pay your bills. Somebody said that to me a couple of episodes ago. When I fill your need, you fill my dinner table at the same time, right?
I love that.
And I love that concept. So looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently since 2016 to now?
Everything. I think most entrepreneurs. No, I'm joking. I think I had this conversation, funny enough, with a fellow founder just this morning. We were laughing together, having a Chatham House rules. Do you call it Chatham House rules in America? When you have a private conversation. So we say, if we were speaking privately, it must have some wonderful historical story. We would say Chatham House rules, as in not for sharing.
Gotcha.
Okay. So I'm curious now to find out what the American. Someone will hopefully tell us what the American. What would you do if you're talking off the record or
off the record? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, off the record.
Right.
Yes. I've lost the question now. I've become obsessed with the history of Chatham House rules. You were asking me
what would you have done differently?
And I joked everything. I think hindsight's a really wonderful thing. I'm a very forward-facing person. I think as a journalist by trade, you naturally are. You're very zeitgeisty. I've been too early in things. I launched wine in can, arguably too early. I'm always up for the next trend. And I guess that's why I was in the right place, right time, quite early with alcohol-free wine. There's a lot of things. And I think entrepreneurs who build a second business, I guess, can often right those wrongs. But then you sort of go, but then the story would have been different. My son was talking to me, a teenager, very wise, about the butterfly effect, about how if one thing was different, how then everything becomes different. So, there's a lot. I probably would have had a much more fixed fellow co-founder because I've got a key business partner, but I haven't got a fixed fellow founder. And it's a very, very, very lonely journey, entrepreneurship. I mean, not in a literal sense, because you're always meeting wonderful people, but in a metaphorical sense, because so much of the complication and pain of the journey you're dealing with mentally, I suppose. So I think I would probably do that next time.
That makes a lot of sense. And my friend Don posted something recently. He founded a company called Social Tables and he sold it. And he posted on LinkedIn the other day, these are the things that I learned and would do differently starting a new business, as an entrepreneur. And one of them was actually getting a business partner. Right. And so it's really good hindsight. And somebody said, and commenting is like, this is great for entrepreneurs to read who are starting going forward, right? Lessons learned and how you can share that. So, I mean, it's very telling because we learn and we can learn from others at the same time.
I think the other thing I would do differently is I've always been very macro. I mentioned that I'm hugely ambitious. I want Noughty to really lead the way in the world as the premium alcohol-free wine. And then I want to be able to arguably democratize to some extent the alcohol-free world so that we have delicious alcohol-free wine that's made beautifully, but at a keener price point. Because, of course, like with delicious organic food, and I was thinking about this when you were talking about the provenance and the in your country and mine to a certain extent, very sadly, good quality food has become quite divided, as in, if you are on a bread line, you can't afford to be feeding your family really good, organic, provenance-based food. We have a problem there, don't we? And the same with drinks. Same with drinks. So there's lots of big picture ambitions about changing that. But systems, it's not a sexy word. So I always had a macro ambitious plan. I think if I was doing my to-do list for new entrepreneurs, set up your systems very early so that they can scale beautifully very fast, because we were a fast growth business. And I think if I had the time again, I would create systems. By that, I mean tech and the backroom sort of foundations that were ready to scale straight away. Because I think often when you're new to business, I probably thought selling however many hundreds of bottles was a big deal. And when you're chasing 1 million, 2 million, the systems just aren't always ready for that. So I think I would say think macro on your systems when you're starting. I know that's not sexy advice, but good practical advice.
Well, it also thinks you have to think about the reporting on the back end. You have to think, what do you want to get out on the back end so you can design the front end to give you what you need on the back end. So that I think that macro look of it does help, but it's also sometimes hard to think of what do I need on the back end, right? If you're originally starting out. Yeah.
And one more thing, which takes me back to your closed-minded anecdote of the influencer old guy who's like, why do we need alcohol-free wine? It would be to develop a very thick skin. As long as your idea is good, don't spend much time listening to people complaining. Because I do sort of see a lot of early stage entrepreneurs doing huge amounts. I mean, let's park tech here, because tech recommendations are very different. The testing is a whole year, however long stage. So I'm not talking tech business now. I'm talking more product-based business, I guess. Just because a lot of people are cynical does not mean you do not have a brilliant idea. So I think surrounding yourself with positive people. Now, there is a caveat to this, because you do need also those smart people who've got your back, who will tell you when things aren't good. But certainly early stage, you want people who are going to build you up, because the early stages are very tough. And if you spend too much time around those cynical people, it can really drag you down mentally. And I think doubt yourself when it comes to your idea too.
100% agree. And even with what I do with food, well, why do we have to accommodate all these people with dietary restrictions or whatever, yes, right? And
why aren't we?
Right. Mm-hmm. And I was actually telling somebody the other day, I ran into a guy here at the show who I taught how to swim when he was 5. Oh. And I haven't seen him since he was probably 7 or 8 or 9. And I said, my career has changed from when I started. It was about, here's food allergies, here's celiac, here's this. But it's really all about the purpose. And it's about inclusion and diversity and how we use food and beverage differently. We should be using food and beverage differently. And so my 12 years of doing what I'm doing is changed, and it really is about the purpose of food and looking at it differently.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's challenging, and I'm up to it. I'm like you. I'm like, let's just keep doing it, right?
Yeah, and I also think that life is full of closed-minded people who will never do anything new, and that's fine. It also leaves a huge gap. I mean, in my world, the fact that there were so many closed-minded people who thought there was no point to alcohol-free wine and it was kind of an oxymoron left me the gulf. And so I think that's another lovely, quite driving way to use that. I mean, obviously you've got to have a sound idea to start with, because I never want to be encouraging people to run away and spend a lot of time and money trying to build a business that's not viable. But as long as your concept's viable.
Very, very true. You don't want to spin your wheels and not being able to get anywhere. So have you had to sacrifice? I mean, you said you moved your family to Paris, uprooted your job and changed careers. Is there anything else personally that you've sacrificed throughout your career that has propelled you to do more?
Yeah, I've sacrificed a lot of things, but I think in the sacrifices, there are also the opposite gains. I mean, I wouldn't be wanting to do this unless I really loved it. I mean, the energy I put into this, it's not objectively a healthy amount. And I think you'll find all founders off the record when they're together will say the same thing. And so it goes back to that passion and the purpose point. I think you need that at the core. They're not just chasing the money. So I wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, it's such a hugely exciting journey. I don't think that the endorphin highs are probably very healthy, because it's such an emotional roller coaster, and you do become, they say in entrepreneurship, quite addicted to it. And they also say you become unemployable on a corporate level if you're a founder, which I think is probably fairly true, depending on the industry, just because you get so used to making every decision, even decisions you have no bloody idea about. You know what I mean? I mean, you become your own boss to such an extent that, I mean, don't get me wrong, if you've got investors, you've got accountability, of course.
Right.
But, just in terms of the everyday stuff, I mean, I love it. It's definitely not for everybody. So I've sacrificed a lot of my personal life. I suppose you live out a lot of your life in the public arena. It's quite strange, because I used to be the one at the BBC asking the questions, and I was very private, but now I have to share more of myself as a founder-led business. So you sacrifice that. You sacrifice to some degree a social life, because while I attend a lot of lovely dinners, events, wonderful, wonderful things, I get some incredible invitations, I'm there in a work capacity. So even if I'm at a wine dinner at midnight in Sydney, which, I mean, we all can admit sounds really rather wonderful, and I'm still working. I'm not there to let my hair down. I'm not there to lose my A game if someone wants to talk about numbers at midnight. So I think there is that strange, I'm sure with you, in what you do so brilliantly, when you make your passion your purpose, a lot of what you are passionate about becomes linked to your work, so I spend very little time romanticizing wonderful tasting wine in vineyards, which of course really was what led me into the industry. So I think once you get to the commercial edge of something, then it's kind of a different game, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I think it's important to share that it's not for everybody. And I think that we should really celebrate the kitchen table entrepreneurs doing a brilliant job who don't want to scale a huge business like I am. It's quite
agree.
I think we need both in the world, and we need more women to be doing both in the world successfully.
Right. I wholeheartedly agree. So 2 questions to wrap this up. What brings you the biggest joy? And we talked about what you sacrificed, but what brings you the biggest joy?
3 things. Travel, which I've not really had a chance to do much of recently, but have just got back on. I mean, we're being very environmentally friendly and never getting on planes for the sake of getting on planes. And we're doing a lot of work on making sure that happens. But I do miss seeing the world in a business sense. And because we've got so many wonderful partners in the US, in South Korea, in Hong Kong, wherever it might be. And so to travel and get to spend time with them is really rather special and can't be beaten. A deal, I mean, I think you're not a founder who's going to scale a big business without being competitive and loving a deal. And we just got a really big deal in the UK yesterday that I haven't announced yet, but getting a deal is just huge for me.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And really the people, I mean, in our world, you'll know this, in the hospitality world, the F&B world, I mean, people. I mean, online is the next best thing. Hopefully one day we can break the bread. But yeah, I just work with some really, really special people. And that buzz, when you love hospitality, it gets into your blood, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, I don't know what I would do if I wasn't in this industry. And I do love meeting people and chatting with them. I even love meeting my Uber drivers or Lyft drivers and finding out where they're from. So I just wanted to post two things from listeners here. Tom Sullivan said, enjoyable, thank you. We'll check out your brand.
Fantastic. It's naughtyaf.com.
And I just posted the link in the chat as well.
Yeah. Naughty
and
with a zero. Yeah.
With the zero. Okay, perfect. People need to know that. And then Kelly Ruff is always keeping us educated. So it's really important, Amanda, thank you for being here, because I want people to be educated about that alcohol-free and vegan options that there are in beverages, not just in food, in beverages.
Yeah. And I think Amber is a brilliant website, ANBA, American-based.
Okay.
And that's doing some brilliant work, and for all of the founder-led brands, all that I'm working with there in America.
Okay, great. And I will find that link and post it here at the chat as well. So one final question. What is your favorite food to eat or pair with your Noughty wine?
Oh, wow. Okay. So truffle pasta.
Truffle pasta. Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I mean, I just don't you or not? I don't know.
I'm not a truffle fan. Yeah.
Maybe it's because I'm plant-based. So truffle just gives you that umami. I don't know. Truffle pasta and Noughty. Now I want that tonight.
Well, and somebody was over here in the market in the press room. Somebody's got dried mushrooms in a bag, and they're so I'm not a huge mushroom fan, but I'm going to try them because they sounded really interesting and they're so nutritious. So
absolutely. And listen, I'm counting on you now, since Noughty's not officially at the Natural Products Expo. I'm counting on you to spread the Noughty word now, Tracy.
I will do that. I promise. Yes. Well, Amanda Thompson, thank you so much for doing what you're doing and being a part of the show today and sharing, the value of non-alcoholic vegan wines. Appreciate it.
I'm delighted, and the pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much, Tracy. You're a brilliant change maker.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate you for making history. You are making history, and we commend you for doing that. And I look forward to seeing the future history that you make.
You're too kind.
Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.